Welcome to Bible Study That Doesn't Suck. This is Mark chapter 10, verses 2 through 16. Today's translation is dependent upon the words and the book of James. Martin Luther hated the book of James. I should tell you that he thought it was the book of straw. You know, as in the weakest house made by the three little pigs, or the stuff that you put under farm animals so they don't make a mess in the barn. Well, anyway, there were three types of ways that the Old Testament was told, or the Hebrew Bible as it's called. First, there's the written down Torah. That's the books of the Bible that we have. There's the oral Torah that was just shared from word of mouth to ears. And then there was the bits that really smart rabbis would talk about and kind of read between the lines and explain for people. So they believed that the original creation story was of an Adam that was gender neutral. He had both male and female parts. But then he was torn in two by God, who creates the first sex reassignment surgery, and he makes a female Eve and a male Adam. But he wasn't the only type of creation that was made that day. It was the only one put in the written down Torah. There was also the amalgamous person who got ripped in half, who created two men who would come back together in love, and another that would create two women who would come back together in love. And this division was only made whole through the bonds of marriage, where these people would come back together and become one flesh again, like that original oneness that God had created them out of. Then, when you remove those bonds of marriage, you can create a tiny little rip, a tiny little brokenness, a bigger brokenness, a gaping hole, or just a noticeable division that divides that covenant that you made with each other. And that's called divorce. That gap then was filled in with people not being able to take care of each other because families were divided. And so women who weren't allowed to work were no longer able to take care of themselves. They found themselves in lives that were full of poverty and starvation and hunger, and often resulted in the only employment being left for them being prostitution. There is a second interpretation about how people were born that was pervasive at the time. Greeks believed that there was really only one kind of person, that you were male and female all of the time, that there were bits of you that were cold, that were lady parts and feelings, and there were bits of you that were hotter, that were male parts. And a male was just warmer in temperature, and so their warm bits would fall out, right? And if you got colder or soft or relied on your feelings too much, your man bits would go back inside of you and you would become a woman. And so people were pretty equal, only it was the change in temperature that changed the difference about who they were and what was going on in their lives. And so here we come to Mark chapter 10, verses 2 through 16. And the Pharisees are really trying to test Jesus. And they say, will you choose the popular idea that people are both male and female, that we all have kind of the same parts? Or will you choose the ancient rabbinical idea that we come from this very romantic whole that is separated and we come back together in marriage when we find that one true love who is ours? And they're really trying to trick him, because if you choose just either one side or the other, someone's going to get mad at you. And so Jesus doesn't answer their question when they ask him, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife? Instead, he answers them by saying, what did Moses command you? And then it's put back on them to answer. And they say, Moses allowed a man to write a certificate of dismissal and to divorce her. Which Jesus then responds by saying, because of your hardness of heart, meaning you didn't choose the romantic answer, he wrote this commandment for you. This is kind of a wink, wink, nudge, nudge here, because we know that divorce is not a commandment. It's not one of the 12. And so Jesus is pointing back to an even more ancient rabbinical idea. But he doesn't stop there. He doesn't only side with the Jewish understanding of marriage. He also says, from the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. For this reason, A man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate. Now here Jesus kind of chooses what Martin Luther often says is the best answer. It's the both and answer. Instead of picking society over the rabbinical idea, he picks both and merges them together. People are both male and female, and there's this romantic idea that the two can still become one flesh. But it doesn't stop there, because the disciples are like, really? Tell us more about this. What's going on here? You seem to be proposing something that's a little more conservative than the Pharisees, and normally that's not your shtick, at least not in the Gospel of Mark. So the disciples are like asking him more questions as soon as they get back to the house about this matter. And he says to them, whoever divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery against her. And if she divorces her husband and marries another, she commits adultery. Now here it looks on the surface like Jesus is holding up the 10 Commandments and bringing us back to this ancient law. So you'd think Jesus is a conservative when it comes to marriage. Certainly, he's very clear. But it doesn't make sense with the whole rest of Mark, where Jesus is always disagreeing with the Pharisees, always disagreeing with the ancient answers, and kind of being more lenient, saying we should follow the prostitutes into heaven, saying that it's like those who are the most vulnerable that we should be in order to be a part of Jesus's understanding of heaven. So what's gone on here? Is this just a little conservative hiccup in the midst of a very radical, progressive Mark? No. That's why the next paragraph of this reading still exists. And it says, people were bringing little children to Jesus in order that he might touch them. And the disciples spoke sternly, kind of like, get those little kids away from this guy. He's way too important to deal with this. But when Jesus saw this, he was indignant. I love the word indignant here. He was indignant and said to them, let the children come to me. Do not stop them, for it is such as these that the kingdom of God belongs. Truly I tell you, whoever does not receive the kingdom of God as a little child will never enter it. And he took them up in his arms, laid his hands on them, and blessed them. Now here Jesus is going and saying, you know what? It's exactly as it has been in the Gospel of Mark. And here's where James comes in. James tells us that true religion, according to Jesus, is religion that helps take care of the widows and the orphans. And in the Gospel of Mark, Jesus would add those who are hungry and the tax collectors, anyone who is on the side of vulnerability. Those are the ones who will show us the way to the kingdom of God. And here it seems that in his merging of the new Greek ideas of what marriage is and these ancient romantic ideas of what marriage is that comes from the wise rabbis, that he's holding a space. He's holding that voice of the book of Isaiah that says, if divorce creates social discomfort, poverty, prostitution, horrible lives for people, then it is our responsibility to honor these ties. And that means Jesus isn't the hardline guy who's saying marriage at all cost. He's saying, take care of the orphans and the widows and don't leave anyone destitute. You don't get to find wealth by trampling over others. Or maybe that's just the way someone who's divorced translates a text that very clearly says divorce is against what God is wishing. Who knows? I wonder what you think of this text. Join the conversation at justlutheran.blogspot.com.